Alright, we're going to talk about understanding composition. I don't spend a ton of time in these intro-level classes talking about composition. That's because you guys are the most advanced generation when it comes to understanding composition. You guys were born with digital tools readily available to you, which means you guys are making more photographs in your lives than any other generation before you. And if we boil making a photograph down to its basics, we're taking a rectangle and we're cutting it out of the world. You guys, just by the sheer amount of photographs that you have made in your lives, kind of understand composition. Maybe not in a way that you can explain it, but you kind of know it at a glance, which I think is pretty powerful. Even more so than my generation, right? I'm not that much older than you guys, but when I was younger, when I was 15 years old, when I was 19 years old, however old, let's just say in my teen years, any time between I was 13 to 19, every year I probably made, I don't know, less than 100 photos. Where most young people now, most teenagers now, they're making hundreds of photos a day or a week. So it's just the availability of digital technology has made you guys very visually intelligent, so you kind of understand composition. But let's go through and talk about it a little bit deeper. So first we need to learn how to pay attention to the elements that our eyes are attracted to, because that's what composition is, how we're going to get viewers to pay attention to what we're making. So, right, we want to keep the viewer's eyes within the frame of our photographs. So I'm going to list a couple things that our eyes are attracted to. Contrast. So areas in an image where light and dark meet. That's contrast. Right? Our eyes jump to the bottom right where that black and white dot meet. Top left. Top right. Bottom right, right? Our eyes kind of seek out that information. We see information and our eyes try to make sense of it as soon as we can, and we're drawn to the extremes. Eyes usually go to the top left in this one, where there's the biggest saturation of the contrast. So I think this one's interesting. We usually get drawn, or my eyes get drawn to the bottom right black and white dot because of their proximity to each other, but I also think that my eye also gets drug up to that top white left one. Right? So I think that that is kind of like a little bit of a balance, right? We're not always going to have a scene with one area of contrast. We're probably going to be balancing multiple areas of contrast. So light, our eyes are attracted to light, right? Same type of thing. Same type of thing. Here it is in a photograph, right? The light in this photograph creates a depth in the scene, right? This is a two-dimensional representation of a scene, but we can feel the depth because of that light. Saturation of colors, right? So we're looking for not just like super saturated colors, but any color that stands out from the rest of the colors in the image. So right here, our eyes probably go to that red dot. My eyes go to the bottom left red dot. Same thing. I always go to red, and I'm sure that you guys are probably pretty similar. So once again, right, the butterfly is not the most saturated color in here, but having that pink flower and the darkness of the butterfly just totally draws our eyes right to that area. So that's a little bit of the light, the saturation, and the contrast. That orange shirt just pops out. I love that blue car. So areas that are sharp, clear, and in focus. So remember, you guys know how to make shallow depth of field photos. You don't have to make everything in your photo in focus, nor should you, right? You are the director of the photograph. Tell the viewer what you want them to pay attention to, right? We're going to focus on the thing that is in focus. We're going to understand that it is more important than the other things out of focus. Not that the things out of focus don't matter, but there is a hierarchy that's created. It creates a little bit of tension when something is really in focus and everything else is kind of out of focus. It really kind of makes the viewer part of the scene. Faces and figures, right? Genetically, we're just drawn to faces and figures. They're attention grabbing, right? Now, I would say that these two pictures are pictures of people, right? And I guess I'm just saying that because if you're trying to take a photo of something and there's a person in it, well, you don't want the viewer to be distracted by the person in it. So you might want to wait till the person's not in the background. So say in this photo, if there was something on that window frame in the left side of the photo that I really wanted to direct the viewer to look at, I wouldn't want that person to be sitting there because we're just kind of programmed to think that the person is the focus of the photo. And so the viewer might actually miss what I was trying to photograph and look at the person. But in this case, I obviously want the viewer to look at the person. Leading lines and bold shapes. Once again, I think it's funny to explain this stuff to you guys because I think inherently you just know it, right? So, right, we can, but based on us positioning ourselves around the world, around the environment that we live in, we can create these leading lines, right? So by leaning up against this building directly to my left, I'm creating this visual, this leading line that then leads into the dock, the line of the dock. So that creates a visual depth in the photograph. The bold shape and the contrast of the cat standing out from everything else. You know, an iconic symbol. That's something we just understand inherently. And it's not just the American flag, just flags in general. That's how flags are designed, to be bold, to be these really iconic symbols. And so they stick out to us. Text. Our eyes are really drawn to text. In the bottom here, I'm saying be cautious when using text, right? It's the same thing as with the people in the picture. If you don't want the text to be part of what the viewer looks at, don't include the text, right? Move around and take the photo where the text is removed from the photo, because anytime there's text in an image, our brain and our eyes just want to make sense of it. Okay, so now that we understand the focal elements, we're going to try to use these to organize them into different methods of image making. So, methods of composition, this is a method that everybody, I mean, the first day of my in-person classes, somebody brings up rule of thirds. I heard that you have to take pictures as rule of thirds. I have to always use the rule of thirds. And while the rule of thirds is a solid method of composition, it's not the only method of composition. So let's actually dive into the rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds is this idea that if we split the frame up into 9 areas and with 3 quadrants, right? 3 quadrants vertical, and it wouldn't be a quadrant. What would it be? 3 areas, vertically and horizontally, right? Wherever those intersections of those, they are quadrants, are, wherever those intersections are, if we place a subject at those intersections, it will be easy for the viewer to understand what's important in the photo. So let's look at a photo that uses rule of thirds, right? The little girl and the thing that she's holding up falls on the rule of thirds. This doesn't have to be exact, just close to that area. Also rule of thirds. So I just want to clarify, rule of thirds is not something like I'm telling you to go out and you have to stick to rule of thirds or golden spiral or any of these. Just know that usually when you see a picture that you think is interesting, just see if it has any of these compositional methods in it. So the golden spiral comes from the Renaissance, and it's a way of composing images that painters used, where you use these golden spirals like this. And if you place leading lines and the subject matter within that spiral, you have an interesting composition. Positive and negative space. Oh, also with the golden spiral, if you go and look at historic paintings, you're going to see this all over the place. Positive and negative space, right? We have the negative space of this out of focus background with this butterfly just popping out perfectly. Symmetry. Making something really symmetrical in the frame. Always kind of hard to do, and any level of where it's not symmetrical sticks out, right? Like I even think that the sun popping through that top right side of this window kind of breaks that symmetry a little bit, but in a very interesting way. I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you're going to try to make a photo symmetrical, you got to really nail it. You don't want to be a little bit off, because it's kind of like when the exercise of drawing a perfect circle. It's like the most impossible thing to draw, because any level of imperfection is just so noticeable. filling the frame. I think that this is one of my favorite ways of composing an image, where you kind of fill the frame. Sorry, let me get this stupid thing out of here. So you fill the frame with the subject matter. And what it does is you're filling it to this point that, you know, a photograph is not just about what's in the frame, it's what it alludes to outside of the frame. And when you fill the frame like this, it totally seems like it's like, right, we're just seeing this like vignette of this giant wall of cotton candy. We're only seeing part of it, but my mind kind of fills in the rest of the thing. And that's because you filled the frame, right? You can feel kind of the visual pressure of this cotton candy pushing against the edge of the frame, like it wants to just like pop out of the confines of this rectangle. I love that. I think that's very interesting. Balance and visual weight. That's something that I think we inherently understand, right? This is a photograph that would have that balance and weight to it, right? We have the dark shadows sitting in the bottom third of the frame. Now that would be all thrown off if this photo was all light and then in the top third we had this dark band. It would feel top heavy. It wouldn't seem like it sits visually in our eyes, right? It would be a little bit off balance. I'm not saying you can't make off balance photos, but you just have to be aware that that's what it's going to do. There's a really famous photographer named Edward Muybridge from the 19th century. His whole thing, he was making photos of Yosemite Valley in like the 1800s. And his whole thing was to make viewers off balance. He wanted to create that. He didn't want to, in his photographs, give the viewer a place to stand. And so that can be used as a powerful tool, right, to make somebody feel like off kilter, or off balance, or discombobulated. But just be aware that if that's what you're doing, that's the effect it's going to have on the viewer, which can be powerful. Develop layers, right? Foreground, middle ground, and background. Like kind of have those defined. So this photo right here, right, we have this like defined foreground of these silhouetted people sitting down with this kind of, you know, dimly lit sign in the midground, and then we have the background. We understand space in this photograph, right? Photography is a really interesting thing if you break it down. What we're doing is we're taking three-dimensional space and we're compressing it into a two-dimensional picture plane, and you have to do that thoughtfully. What we wouldn't want is like the dark side or the dark corner of this sign to be overlapped in this person's head, because then it would break this illusion that these are separate things, right? We would see the blob of this absolute black with no detail with this blob of black with absolute detail, and we wouldn't know where one began and one ended. So always make sure that when you're trying to develop those layers of foreground, middle ground, and background, that you're really visually separating those things. And if you want to see a master who does that, look at Stephen Shore's photographs. He's like so good at doing that. All right, so we covered a lot of information about methods of composition today. I hope that you use some of this stuff in your images. I don't want you to feel burdened by it. I want you to go out there and feel free to make photos how you make photos, but I want you to analyze them using this information. Look at them and say, oh, this is what I did. Does this photo fit into the golden spiral? What I don't want you to do, and it's funny because some cameras have this where you can set the viewfinder to have like the golden spiral on it, or, you know, so you're looking through the viewfinder and you're seeing the golden spiral or the rule of thirds, and then you can go and make a photo to fit that. I think that that's like the cart before the horse. I would go out and be free to make photos how you make photos, and then analyze them thinking about these methods of composition. All right, I hope this was useful for you guys, and I hope that you're having fun making photos and you're learning a ton. Okay, bye.